Hi folks, welcome to the Paranormal Peep show with myself, Andy Chaplin and Neil Geddes-Ward. Neil, how you been?
I'm fine, Andy. How are you?
Bored as usual, but not too bad. I'm looking forward to today's guest. It's quite an interest of mine, actually, this one.
Well, not too far down the road from you, I believe.
No, literally 20 minutes down the road.
Yeah.
And in fact, I think my mum went to school in the vicinity. It's kind of the Brimsdown Enfield area. So, yeah,
right. Okay. Well, we'll get straight into it then. So, welcome to Enfield's very own psychical GP, which is Dr. Ian Rubenstein. Welcome to the show.
Good evening.
Thank you. Nice to have you here. How
I'm
are
very
you?
happy to be here.
You're okay?
Yeah, good. Rested. Looking forward to the chat.
Good stuff.
It's an interesting subject of mine. I feel it's part of the folklore of the area where I've worked for better part of 36, 37 years.
Okay. So we know a little bit about you, Ian, because obviously, as Andy said, you did a talk for us at the High Wycombe Paranormal Meetup group about 4 years ago. And we've also done interviews with Mark and Irene of the Paranormal UK Radio Network as well. So maybe if we just start about yourself first of all, and then we'll move on to other topics of the area and see how we go. So
I want to give people a quick kind of hint as to what we might be talking about. I don't know if you guys can see that.
Oh yeah.
So I've come prepared.
No sponsorship. For those that couldn't see that, Andy's wearing a Ghostbusters t-shirt. For those that are listening in on podcasts and stuff. So Ian, I mean, you've got a bit of a psychic background, which is a very interesting take for a regular GP. Makes me wonder about all the GPs I've ever gone to see in my past. You know, do they think all this sort of stuff is rubbish, or do you think secretly they've got some thoughts about all this area? I mean, you're the guy to ask on that, I think.
It's interesting because I'm very active on various Facebook groups for doctors, and there was a group called Doctors.net UK. And I've always been very open about what happened to me in about 2003, because it was mind-blowing how I suddenly got a message from a patient that made me pursue psychic development. And then I started getting messages myself and all sorts of weird coincidences. It was a very wacky, wild ride for me, my family, my practice and my patients, to be honest. And it opened out my mind. And of course, me being me, I'm not frightened to talk about this. I'm quite upfront about it. I like to share my experiences because I think we're all in it together, basically. And I think if weird stuff is happening, then someone's got to talk about it, bear witness to it, and put it out there. And once you start talking to it amongst doctors, I mean, they're just like people. When you get them on their own, they'll admit they've had a few things, but no one wants to talk about it because everybody's afraid of looking stupid. But I'm not afraid of looking stupid because I work from the premise I probably am stupid, so it doesn't matter. And I would be happy to engage people and tell people what's happened to me. So I mean, not only did I start having the experience, I embraced it, and like I tend to do, I tend to sort of try and incorporate it in my work as a doctor. Fortunately, I'm blessed with partner. We're at a very busy practice in Enfield, North London, and I'm blessed with very good, open-minded partners who, whilst they wouldn't do what I'm doing, they're quite happy to let me pursue my interests as long as it's safe and not endangering patients. And obviously you've got to be professional. So I've managed to incorporate it as part of my life. My patients know that I sometimes get these odd messages that come through and weird things happen. And of course, once they know you're interested, they start to tell you their stories. So it's been a very interesting, it hit me when I was 48. I'm now 65. It's been a very, very interesting part of my career that I didn't really expect would happen. So, yeah.
When you say you kind of use it within your profession, is there anything kind of like that's state mandated telling you that you shouldn't do it? I mean, for instance, how do you do it? Do you slip in kind of like a couple of psychic things as you're giving a diagnosis?
No, I don't use it for diagnosis.
Okay.
I mean, because I don't do healing either. I mean, I might do. If you're a spiritualist, if you believe in spiritualism, you'd say, well, you have healing guides working with you anyway. I don't go there. But actually, one of the reasons why I don't go there is I'm not a believer, you see, I'm a seeker. So I still don't know. And there are other alternative explanations. I mean, so I'm looking for evidence. And the best way to get evidence is giving someone a message and see if it means anything. So to some extent, I'm trying to convince myself, I suppose. So whenever I end up giving a really good message, which is not all, I mean, I'm not the best medium in the world, believe me. There are way better. And I'm just, it's just something I do. It's not, obviously, I'm not a professional medium, but whenever you do end up giving a message that's evidential and useful, I think, my God, that's amazing. And that sort of makes me think, well, maybe there is. In fact, my patients tend to believe it more than I do. And they say, for God's sake, doc, why don't you just believe? The answer is because when you've trained in science and medicine, belief is not, it's not, okay, I believe I love my wife. I believe I'm a doctor. But in terms of believing evidence, it's not a matter of belief, because in science, what you do is you construct a hypothesis, then you try and knock it down. And all you're doing is reducing the level of uncertainty. But you never know. You only know what you don't know. You only know what isn't true. And so belief isn't really part of science. So right now, the hypothesis I'm working with is, probably spiritualists might have a point. We're certainly greater. I believe that enough's happened to me to believe that paranormal phenomena occur. And this spiritualist hypothesis is useful. It's not the only one, but it's certainly a framework within which one can work and develop. I think you always need a framework within which to do this sort of work, because it can be very destabilizing. I mean, when you start opening up to these psychic phenomena, you become a bit of a space cadet. I mean, I was the guy at parties drinking one hand, celery stick in the other, backing you into a corner saying, guess what happened to me, and they put back, we all, it's called the space cadet phase. Eventually that goes away. But when this stuff happens to you, it completely knocks you for six. It's interesting. I mean, although I'm Jewish background, I'm not religious, but I the Jewish mysticism, the Kabbalah, which is, the magical system. In fact, I discovered that in fact, one of my partners is Jewish and very religious, and he was saying that actually, in the Jewish mystical tradition, you're not meant to even talk about this stuff or even study it until you're obviously a man, because it's a very patriarchal religion. But you have to be over the age of 40 and married with children.
Oh wow!
because they recognise that it's actually destabilising. Because I mean, I'm sure you've all met people who've gone off, slightly round. They're just going off in the distance. They slightly goes a little bit round the bend, and you can't quite reach them.
I know, plenty of those.
Exactly. So for me, I was established in my work. I had 2 kids. I had a wife who was very supportive. And when all this stuff started happening to me, which was like occasionally hearing voices that would give me evidential messages or really weird coincidences, I was in an environment where I could discuss it with people and talk about it. Even my patients. Actually, my patients were very helpful. I had a couple of patients who knew about this stuff. One guy called Dave Godfrey, who actually was a healer, that was also former science teacher, and he gave me some really good advice. And his advice was, you need to join a psychic development circle, and you need to sort of pursue it. And I said, I'm not doing that. He said, well, if you don't, it can drive you nuts. And his advice was good advice, and eventually I did. And after a while, it all becomes normal, just something you do. So occasionally when I'm with patients, I'll pick up something, and of course, now most of my patients know what I do, and they can tell. They say, you get this look in your eye, doc. What are you picking up? I say, oh, okay. but sometimes it'll just happen, and no, obviously I say, look, I do get these notions. I don't know what they mean, but do you want me to share it with you? And they'll say, yeah. And I say, look, I don't know what it means, but it's for you to work out. let's work it together. And of course, with mental mediumship, it's not, you're not often hearing voices, you're often having images or symbolic things. And you say, well, what did that mean to you? And then I say, well, it means that. And there's a bit of a toing and froing. So it's not like platform mediumship, which is very difficult, where you're saying, I've got this and this and this and this. I mean, you can do that, but it's often more a one-to-one reading, which, so you could say it's a bit of mediumship, it's a bit of intuition, obviously quite a lot of cold reading as well, I'm sure. You're looking at people's body language. You can't get away from that. So it's an interesting and eclectic mix. And it's very useful for bereavement counselling. And it's I mean, this is not the place to tell it maybe, but I had some stunning experiences just even recently.
Go for it. If you want to tell us, we'll be interested.
Oh, well, I'll tell you one that's recent. I've got a patient, and she came to see me, and she's a dinner lady. She works at the school, and I know her really well, but I just as a person, I don't know what her hobbies are. And I sensed that there was, I was speaking to her, just like I'm speaking to you, and I suddenly saw, I said, Penny, have you been collecting milk tokens? She said, milk tokens? I said, yeah, flat things connected with milk. She said, no. I said, milk bottle tops. You remember the old milk bottle tops, like Blue Peter, the silver foil milk bottle tops? Have you been collecting? She said, yeah, I've been collecting milk bottle tops, but not the silver foil ones, plastic ones. I said, okay. I said, do you mind if we pursue this? She said, no, she's really into this stuff. I said, I've now got a lollipop lady, school crossing attendant, for if there's anybody here from the States listening. And they wear this white sort of mac, and they carry a stick with a stop children for crossing, because like a big lollipop. And she said, yeah, I can take that. And then I felt the presence of a lady, grey-haired lady, in about her 70s who'd passed. And I said, look, I think I can sense this woman around, and can you take her? But she's calling you a diamond, and she wants me to give you a red ribbon with a medal on it, and she wants you to put it around your neck, and she wants you to give you a kiss on the forehead. So I said, do you mind if I do that? So I said, I made mind putting this red ribbon and gold thing around that, and I gave her a kiss on the forehead, and she just said, oh my God, you couldn't possibly know that, because I didn't know what I was saying. I actually got recorded her on my phone, but she wouldn't want me to sort of broadcast it. But her look was a picture. So the story goes that she's a dinner lady at school, and one of her friends was a school teacher, the lady I described, who died recently. Now, this school teacher had a daughter who was a lollipop lady, and the lollipop lady's son was a disabled boy, and he had a wheelchair, but his wheelchair needed to be upgraded, but they didn't have the money for it. And the wheelchair firm said, as a sort of publicity stunt, if she could collect the weight of the wheelchair in plastic milk bottle tops, they would give him a new wheelchair. And just that day, she collected enough, and she'd got the right weight.
Wow.
Now, I mean, I don't know where that came from.
Yeah.
But that was absolutely stunning. And every so often I look at my phone, I thought, this actually happened. Now, that was stunning evidence for her, and it was stunning evidence for me. She just stood there saying, you couldn't possibly know that. And I stood there and said, no, I couldn't possibly know that. What, we just sat there like, my God, where did that come from? So and that's in the GP consultation. So, I mean, that's not normal, you see. And the other one recently, I got a patient called Vic, and he won't mind me telling this because I actually asked him. So Vic, this is where he actually saved the health service some money. Vic came to see me with a cough that wouldn't get better, and it was awful. And he's of the age where you do a chest X-ray and everything, and his cough wouldn't go away, and you think, well, this could be something serious. And he saw me, and he saw various partners at the surgery, and eventually been referred along with the suspected cancer pathway, and had all sorts of things done, CT scans, tubes down his throat, whatever. And this guy could not. The minute he started talking, he would start coughing. His life was misery. And he was actually in tears. And one day he came to see me, and he was in tears. And I said, well, hopefully they'll get to the bottom of it. Anyway, I knew that they hadn't, because I got the letters from the consultant, and I was dreading seeing him. And he came to see me, and he had his head in his hands. And I said, Vic, they haven't found anything. And he just cried. So I thought, well, what do I do? So I thought, okay, let's broaden it out a bit, because seemed to be barn door physical thing, but maybe there was a psychological component. So he said, Vic, did anything happen to you just before it happened, before you had your symptoms? And he said, no. I said, you know, because if you've had this for a year, what happened last year? He said, oh, come to think about it, my brother-in-law Ken died. And as he said it, I felt this whoosh, and I saw a row of miniature whiskey bottles. And now Vic, again, he knows. I said, Ken, I said, do you mind if I tell you what I'm sensing? He said, no, go ahead, Ian. I said, I've seen a row of miniature whiskey bottles. He said he used to collect miniature whiskey bottles. And as he said that, the minute he started, I made that link, more information started flowing through. So I was suddenly found myself in my head, looked like I was in a workshop. I could see engineering manuals and machinery I couldn't make sense of. And I knew that this guy, whoever I connected with, read a lot, but only read technical manuals. That's all he read. And that he was very good with his hands. And then I said, can you take that? He said, yes, my brother-in-law. He said, he makes, I'd never heard these heart spoons. I said, what heart spoons? He said, when they take hearts out of people for heart transplants, they have these spoons. And he makes the special ones for little babies when they're doing heart operations. I never heard of them. And he's the only one of the few guys in the country who makes them. And that was his specialty. Okay, great. Then I was transported into the guy's pub, and I could see him drinking. I could describe that. And then I saw this field, and it made no sense to me at all. I could see there was like a boundary with a ditch to the left, and there was a green expanse. There were little flags throughout the field. And I said, okay, Vic, I'm seeing this. What am I describing? And he just laughed. He said, there's no way you could know that. I said, what am I seeing? He said, you're seeing the golf course. And he said, he wanted his ashes scattered there. We weren't meant to, but we did it anyway. Okay. And he looked at me and said, that's amazing. Anyway, so I said, well, okay, Vic, I hope that helped. But I still felt I hadn't done much. Anyway, I said, well, come and see in a month's time. So a month's time he comes to see me, and he's fine. He said, he comes in smiling, because I was dreading seeing him because I thought he'd still be coughing. I said, how are you doing, Vic? He said, I'm cured. I said, what do you mean cured? He said, the minute you gave me that reading, he said, I felt this weight lifting from my chest. And within 3 days, the cough had gone completely, hasn't come back. And he hasn't come back since. So I've said, look, I mean, I've done this enough. I mean, when someone's psychologically upset over an incident, sometimes just talking about it evinces a cure, you know, because just if they're aware of what's causing it, it can cause a relief. I said, well, maybe I wasn't in touch with your brother, or maybe it was just that we got to the bottom of it. And he said, look, Ian, I don't care what you say. I think that you were in contact with it. And if you don't believe that, there's something wrong with you. So,
I love the fact that the readee is trying to convince the medium.
Yeah. Well, this is my thing. It was like that when I was developing, because all the people I was in circle with were sorry for me. They said the trouble with you is you're overeducated, and it's true. It's true. When you go on when you're trained in Western scientific materialism, it does affect the way you think. And one thing I actually learned from this is that for years I thought that when I gave an explanation to my patients, they knew what I was going on about. What I didn't realize was that unless you're, and this is not talking down to people, but unless you've been through the Western materialistic mindset of going to university, in my day, because now university is much more broad. In my day, it was a very small area. You had to do your, if you're doing medicine, it's like science A levels, it was really, really highly difficult to get into. You were channeled down a way of thinking, and most people don't think like that. And I don't actually think it's great. It's got its view. Science is wonderful and everything, but you have to accept there are other ways of thinking, and thinking in symbols and the narrative view, making a story of what your life's about is really, really important. And I think that's one of the problems that the Western mindset's got. That I think that's why people are railing against it, because never has science and medicine been so powerful, but never have people felt so disconnected from it. I think we're using it now. I mean, look at this, and this is all as a result of it. And I think it's because it's lost touch with the human side of it. Now, in medicine, of course, that's what you're doing. You're dealing with the science, but you're also dealing with the human side, and you get this dynamic tension. So I feel what I'm trying to do is to bring the two together.
I think there's a bit of a different way that West versus East, for instance, do it.
Yeah.
So what I understand is that in Asia, India, and China, and Japan, etc., they have a more holistic approach. So they look at the whole body, and they look at the nutrition and the balance and everything. Whereas I think with Western, it's got like you've got one little problem. We'll zoom in on that problem and fix
Absolutely,
that problem.
it's a reductionist approach. I mean, I'm lucky my wife's Indian. I mean, she was born in India. She came over here when she was 4. She's a doctor as well. And when all this started happening with me, I mean, I know couples where someone went psychic and it split their relationship up. But in my case, my wife, I mean, she's very down to earth, and she believes more than me. But she's not. She doesn't want to train it. She says, "No, you go off and do it. It's fine. Are you sure? No, it's fine. It's real. Don't worry about it." So she was really, really supportive. I mean, I'm not sure about my kids. I mean, I've got 2 sons. One's now a GP himself, and the other one's actually has just done his PhD, and he's a researcher into machine learning. He did an internship at Google. He's in Germany. He's a clever boy. And when you're at Google, they invite people to come in. You can come in as a guest. And he was in Zurich. But he wouldn't let me in there, and I said, why not? He said, because I don't want to be known as the guy at Google with the weird dad. But actually, because
you need to go in dressed as a wizard. You need a full Gandalf outfit with a staff. That'd be amazing.
Well, I normally dress like that, you see. But actually, when he came to London, he got me in there. It's quite a nice place, actually. Me and my wife were the oldest people there, actually. It's quite remarkable. Yeah, so that's me and my crazy family. But yeah, I mean, really, it's not here to talk about me. We're here to talk about the Enfield Poltergeist, I suppose.
Well, how about going back to the beginning of your psychic stuff? Because I know there's a really interesting story where you was a teenager and your sister was with you, and I think our listeners and viewers might be interested to know about some early experiences, and then you kind of forgot about it, didn't you?
Well,
Neil, your webcam is off, by the way.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, mine is. You can't see
me. I can see Neil.
He can see.
I can see a profile picture. I can't see the webcam.
I can see mine. I can see mine.
I can see Neil.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe it's just me.
Yeah.
Strange.
Okay. So actually, I've got actually. What I realised is, because when I started going through this and my book came out, obviously I've been doing a lot of reading. I realised that actually there's more in my life than I thought. So I'll tell you a couple of stories, if you don't mind, from my life that I hadn't realised. Now we know that when people have near-death experiences, they often come back transformed, don't they? Before I started telling all these stories about my psychic experience, I used to tell a story that actually would happen to me. I had a near-death experience. I actually did. I used to tell this about. Well, I didn't almost die, but it wasn't a near-death experience because, you don't have to die with a near-death experience or be at death's door. But I was really ill. So in my day, if you had a sore throat, if you had enough of them, they took your tonsils out. We don't do that now. I mean, you can have enormous tonsils and adenoids coming out your nose. They still won't do it, right? When they should. But in my day, if you had enough sore throats, they whipped your tonsils out. And of course, I had a mum who, the minute you were ill, she'd tuck you up in bed and give you a buttered roll and tomato soup. Well, I mean, you do that to a kid, it's obvious. You're going to start saying, I've got a sore throat, Mum. Don't have to go to school. I'll have my buttered roll, tomato soup. And I didn't actually have a sore throat. But if you look in someone's throat as a doctor, they often look red, Anyway, so
just on a side note, what is the point of tonsils in an evolutionary sense? What do they do?
They're lymph glands, and they guard. You've got lymph glands everywhere where things join other things. And that area, the tonsil and the adenoid, is like a ring of lymph glands, so that they protect. You have anything going in from outside, it might be infections, bacteria, viruses. They'll be the first to know, and they'll start sort of protecting you. So that's what they're there. And it's probably not a good idea to remove them, especially when the kid's actually pretending to have a sore throat, as I was. So anyway, I remember going to North Middlesex Hospital and seeing this guy. He actually had a head mirror on.
Really old-fashioned stuff.
They're the ENT surgeons. That's what they had. You have a little flame with a head mirror. That's the only time doctors wear it. I mean, I thought when I was going to qualify as a doctor, I'd get my head mirror, but no, it's only ENT surgeons. So anyway, so I end up having my tonsils out, which was not a nice experience because when they actually cut the tonsil, it's called a guillotine, like a little, they cut it and that's it. And they cauterize the tissue so it doesn't bleed. And I started bleeding and I was losing quite a lot of blood. I was, I was actually bringing up a lot of blood. I must have lost quite a lot of blood, but not enough because they didn't transfuse me. So I wasn't at death's door. And I remember I was sort of feeling quite ill. And they had to take me back down to the operating theatre. And I had to go under the anaesthetic. Now, when I went under the second time, I had this, what I always thought was a dream. And remember, this was 1964. I was 9. And it was like this. Have you ever seen molten glass being extruded and then twisted round when they make these vases? It was like this extrusion, like a very thick umbilical cord, but about that thick, from the center of my abdomen, was being extruded out. And it was twisting. And it was like I was sitting and it was in this dark place. And this thing was coming out of me and it was twisting gently, slowly into the distance. And this dark place was like these polytunnels you have in gardens, the black polytunnels with like ribs. It was like I was inside one of them. And on the end of this thing that was coming out of me was a tiny little white light. And I knew that I actually was that little light on the end of that thing. And that was nice. And then it just disappeared round the corner and I didn't know anything. And I always told that story. I didn't know what it meant. And of course, that was before the term near-death experience was coined. Now, I didn't have a being of light, but there were elements of it. A near-death experience doesn't have to have all the elements. I had the tunnel. I had this idea of moving, and certainly the idea that my true essence was actually a tiny little spark on the end of a stalk. Anyway, that's an interesting story. But the weird thing is this. That was at the North Middlesex Hospital. Segue, fast forward 14 years later, I was now a houseman, a doctor, working in the same hospital. And I was doing obstetrics and gynecology. And in those days, if a woman came in, say she just had a baby and there were bits of placenta left, in those days, you were this senior house officer on call. I mean, I was young. I was in my early 20s. You would just phone up the on-call anaesthetist, and the anaesthetist would anaesthetize a woman, and you'd just do a D&C. It was like a little suction tube with like a little scraper on it, and you just suck out all the content. Very simple, very easy to do. You'd have to book the theatre. So I phoned up the theatre booking clerk, and she said, "Oh, you can't use the main theatre, doc. It's being redecorated. You have to go to the old block." So she led me through to the old block when I got there, and it was around a few corners. And as I entered this operating theatre, I felt this most peculiar feeling. It was like, "Oh God, I've been here before." And I said, "Look, I've been here before." She said, "No, you couldn't have been." I said, "Yeah, I feel like I've been here before." She said, "No, you can't have been because this has been mothballed for about the last 10 years. It was the old ENT, paediatric ENT theatre. And that was the theatre I'd had my operation in." Now, the thing is, you say, well, you were there. Actually, I wasn't, because when they anaesthetize you, you're in a side ward. By the time you go into the theatre, and all operating theatres look the same, you're not going to remember that. You're out cold. So that was really interesting. I just thought it was a funny story. That's an interesting thing. It's only with hindsight that I realised that's just another thing in my psychic development.
Yeah,
so I said, maybe something happened to me then. The next thing that happened to me was a UFO incident. So I was 14 and I was born in 1955, so that's 1969. Yeah, there was still, if you believe it, I do believe it, they were landing on the moon. And I was obsessed.
We have a lot of contention there, but carry on.
I was obsessed with astronomy, and I used to look at the sky. And I grew up in Tottenham, North London. Skies weren't that great. So my house looked north from my bedroom window. And it was a big Victorian house. And I used to sit out. So the Victorian house, you've got like a big front, big thing at the back, and they often have a lean-to. We had a 3-story front of the house, a 2-story back. So there's a little window that looked out onto the lean-to, and you could sit out there looking north. So to my right was the railway line that moves out of London going up to Ponders End. And on my left, you could actually see Muswell Hill, Alexandra Palace. So I could see the sky. And I used to sit out there most nights, if it was a warm night, looking at the sky. And then one night I looked up and I could see, it looked like, it was about a quarter of the size of the full moon and the same colour. And it was sort of sort of at that above my house, but very high up. I can't estimate how high it was. There was a sheet of cloud reflecting the orange streetlights from London, and that sort of cloud's quite low. I don't know, 300-400 feet. I don't know. It was below that. It was just stuck there above the house. It wasn't doing anything. So
what
I
shape
called
was it in?
It was looked like a full moon, but if you looked at it, it almost looked like it was slightly pear-shaped, like a toy balloon.
Mhm.
But it was reflecting this. It was exactly the same color as the full moon, but a quarter of the size. And I looked at it through binoculars, and it was featureless. There were no markings on it. It wasn't the moon; it was below the clouds, and it was just stuck there. I called my mum, and she had a look. She didn't know what it was. And after about a couple of hours, it got boring, so I went to bed. So for some reason, I woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning that night, and I opened my bedroom window. I thought, I wonder if that thing's still there, and it was. But by that time, the sky had cleared and you could see the stars, but you could see some very high clouds and they were scudding across the sky. That thing was still there. But as I looked, it started to slowly drift across the sky. But as it moved faster and faster. So by the time it had gone from the western horizon to the eastern horizon above the railway line, it was really shooting fast and it dwindled really rapidly across the sky. Almost like if you ever remember the old original Star Trek, the original series, it goes like that. It was like that at the end. And I still to this day don't know what it was. But the question is, of course, why did I wake up at that precise moment?
Mm.
And up to that point, I'd had quite a lot of trouble at school in terms of not being very academically clever or good at it and things like that. I mean, I was the youngest kid in my class. And, I was with kids who were like a year ahead of me. So it could just be the fact I was getting older. But from that point onward, it was almost like I woke up and I suddenly started to get better and better. And then I excelled and then I ended up going to medical school. Looking back and hearing things later on, I do wonder if, the idea that there's this link between UFOs and paranormal phenomena and spirit lives, and with subsequent events, you do wonder, is that part of it?
Was we're fully there. We have been for a while. Me and Neil. We absolutely believe. I hope I'm not speaking for you too much, Neil, but we can see definitely the connection between because basically it falls into the realms of the paranormal. So you've got the ufologists and you've got the ghost hunters. Yeah. We're talking about dimensions here, and whether they're dimensions on this planet or a different planet or a different dimension, they're all part of the same bag, so far as I'm concerned. Would you agree, Neil?
Yes, I can hear some weird music from somewhere.
Oh, it might be my wind chimes. I'll go and take them
down. Okay. I was thinking, cue the strange music as we go into the subject. I thought, how topical,
But actually, I haven't told Andy the story, which you actually originally.
The original one, yes.
The original story. Sorry, because I got off half cop. But so this is the story that my wife was sick of. Right? She'd heard it. She didn't know the characters involved, and she was so sick of it. Every time we used to tell this story, she used to roll her eyes. I've ended up telling this story on all over the place, and it's been broadcast. She's now given up. She's obviously the world needs to know this story. So first year at medical school. Now so I just done my A-levels. I was still really into space and science, So I went to Nottingham Medical School. My friend from school, he went to Leicester. Nottingham and Leicester are very, very close. He did physics. And he ran a disco and he had lots of friends. I used to go there to party. Well, I'd work at Nottingham really hard, then go to Leicester to party. And he had a girlfriend, and his girlfriend was staying with him in his house in Oakwood. And me and my sister went round there. So his girlfriend, Felicity, she had long, dark hair. She was quite a nice looking girl. And they were sat next to each other. And I was sat with my sister. I was sitting opposite my friends, and my sister was sitting so she could see their profile. In the front room of a 1930s house in Oakwood with a full electric light. We never took drugs. We never smoked anything. All we had was coffee. And we'd been drinking coffee. It was about midnight. And all of a sudden, the atmosphere changed. And we all said, the room's gone green. We didn't know what it meant, but it felt like the room had gone green. Then it cleared. And then suddenly, I look up at Felicity, and there's someone else there. There's this blonde-haired snow queen, blonde fringe, instead of waist-length dark hair, shoulder-length blonde hair, high cheekbones, and these piercing blue eyes looking right into my soul. And the curious thing was that she had very curiously distorted white lips, but very thick, as if they hadn't formed properly and coated with what looked like frosted lipstick. And I got this message in my, now you call it a download, but we're talking about 1974. That term didn't exist then, but it was like a download. In my head was immediately, I marked this, know there's more to life than meets the eye. One day you'll understand. And that message came into my mind, my sister started screaming at the top of her voice, and she was only 15 at the time. She was terrified. And she said, my God, can you see those lips? Can you see those lips? And I turned around to her and said, what, you've seen it too? And looked back, and Felicity was completely normal. Well, I burst into tears. Not that I was frightened. It was just I was overwhelmed with the emotion. My sister was screaming hysterically. And my friends looked at us like we were mad. And we had to tell them what had happened. They knew nothing about it. We jumped into my dad's car. It was now about 2 o'clock in the morning after we calmed down. Woke them up. You can imagine what they said. take your friends back home and come to bed. The next day, we phoned round my friends, and my friend Steve said, well, I don't know what it was, but my next door neighbour, a guy called Keith Hudson, is a medium. And maybe he'll know. So we went round to see Steve's house in Phillip Lane in Tottenham. And this rather strange guy who's 27, so he's a bit older than us, prematurely balding, Keith Hudson comes in and says, oh yeah, what you saw was a spirit guide. And he said, it's in the Bible. Like, that meant much to me, you know. And he looked at me, he said, Ian, you've got a lot of knowledge around you. You don't know you know it, but you will one day. And I thought, I bet he says that to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Mind you, I was a medical student, so obviously, you know, just on my A-levels, he would say that. But anyway, so I didn't know what to make of it. And he showed me his little Spiritualist National Handbook guide, Transfiguration Phenomena. I thought, well, you know, I don't believe in spirits. Yeah, okay, something happened. Maybe it was a hallucination, but hang on, if it's a hallucination, how come my sister saw it? That means telepathy is real. That's not in the textbooks either. Very difficult. So, you know, I shoved it to one side and just told the story of itself. And it was a good story. I mean, I trot it out. So I stopped telling my near-death story. I had Felicity's face story, because, you know, these things are nice to tell people. I actually told it to a couple of patients, which they found quite interesting. Well, funnily enough, when I started having my paranormal phenomena, my wife noticed that there was a guy giving a talk at the local spiritualist church, and my patient Dave had already told me that I should go to a spiritualist church to join a circle. And she said, well, this Keith Hudson, he's giving a talk at the local spiritualist church, a demonstration of clairvoyance. He's taking a service, in other words. We ought to go. She said, is that the guy you saw with Felicity's face? I said, yeah. She said, well, why don't we go? So we went. And I hadn't seen him for 27 years, actually.
Crikey.
And I looked different. I mean, I had a beard in those days when I was a teenager, and dark, long, curly hair. I mean, look at me now. It's terrible. That's what age does to you. And because I'm actually unrecognizable. So I sat cowering at the back of this really weird place, a spiritualist church. I don't want to go to these places.
Which one was it of interest? Because I might know
Beacon
it.
of Light in Enfield.
Oh, I know. Yeah, I do know it. Yeah.
Lovely place. Absolutely lovely. I mean, I sat in circle there for a while as well. And then, so Keith gets up and he starts giving everyone messages. And he comes to me and he says, sir, you have a lot of knowledge around you. You don't know you know it, but you will very soon. They're telling me you're going to write a book about it. I thought, well, that's similar to the message he gave me when I was a teenager. He must say it to everyone. Actually, he doesn't. And he didn't recognize me. And how we established contact was the president of the church stood up and said, Mr. Hudson doesn't drive. Can anyone give me a lift back to Walthamstow? So I stood up and said, and sort of bound up to the front and said, yeah, but only if he comes out to my house and has a cup of tea first. And he sort of stepped back because he thought, you know, you do get a lot of nutters at these places. I said, Keith, it's me, Ian, you know, Ian Rubenstein. I said, what, the doctor? I said, yeah. He said, oh, I was talking about you the other day. So he came back to my place. He had a cup of tea. He sat by the back door smoking, because I realised that mediums tend to smoke like chain smoking. And I took him back to Walthamstow, and he showed me around his church. He said, look, he said, you don't have to be a spiritualist. We run the largest open circle in North London. And if you want to sit in, you can just sit in and, you know, and see what you do. I thought, well, as it's Keith, I'll go. So I did. And that's how I started training as a medium. And that's when the really interesting stuff started happening. So, but that's another story. Anyway, so over the years, my patients know that I'm interested in all this stuff. And of course, it's quite appropriate. And it adds to sort of the feeling of rightness that I should be the psychic doctor in Enfield, in the area. Actually, the area, my practice area covers Green Street, where the famous poltergeist was. Because I never saw it, because that was in 1977. I actually hadn't qualified. I was in Nottingham then, although I'm from Tottenham. So I'm from the area. I mean, I obviously heard about it. Because once people realised that I was interested, then patients started coming in and telling me about their experiences with the poltergeist. So should I tell you a few?
Absolutely, please do.
Okay, so I've got a patient called Roy. He's left the practice now. Lovely guy. And Roy ran the used cooker shop opposite my surgery. So it was a domestic appliance which they refurbish and resell. So you'd go to a surgery and you see all these ovens and fridges outside, and and he ran that shop. And I'd looked after Roy for ages. And when he heard that I was interested in this, he said, Ian, you ever heard about the Enfield Poltergeist? I said, yeah. He said, I saw it. I said, what do you mean I saw it? What do you mean you saw it? He said, well, I used to pick up someone from the house every so often and take them out. Yeah, I think he used to work either with Peggy, or I suppose it would have been Peggy Hodgson or something. Someone who lived in the house. He'd go in there and pick them up. And he'd normally wait outside. And one day, no, it couldn't have been Peggy, because Peggy said they're not ready yet. There was someone who was staying there who he collected. And she said, oh, so-and-so's not ready yet. Why don't you come and have a cup of tea? So he did. He sat down on a little single settee, and Peggy came in and put the cup and saucer on the arm. And she left the room, and he said the thing lifted up, sailed gracefully across the room and smashed into the wall. And he said, Doc, you've never seen anyone run as fast as I did in your life. He said, I couldn't wait to get out of that place. So the interesting thing is that he told this story for years. And Roy is he likes deep sea diving. And of course, the place to do that is in Sri Lanka. And I don't know if you remember Arthur C. Clarke. Clarke,
that's where he went and lived.
Yeah. So and Roy actually had a house by the coast in Sri Lanka that actually got swept away in the tsunami, actually. Okay. So he was telling this story to a cab driver in Colombo, and the cab driver said, oh, you must meet Arthur. I'll tell Arthur about this. So Arthur C. Clarke got to hear about it, and he told it to Arthur C. Clarke, and he came back with a photo of him and his wife either side of Arthur C. Clarke. So he was very proud of that. And I have absolutely no doubt. I mean, there's no way that man was lying, right? I mean, really, it's a good story. So, yes, that's one of the stories, yeah.
So there's a lot of controversy, because obviously the girls admitted that they were faking part of it, but that's not to say that there weren't other real things going on. But of course, it does muddy the waters, and the skeptics would just say, well, the girls are faking it, so end of story. But we obviously don't think that is the end of the story.
No. I mean, I don't know if I've got a book here, actually. I got it down. It was given to me because I remember the Ghost Club, and Alan Murdy very kindly forwarded me a copy of this because he knows I'm interested in, I live in Enfield. This is a very good book, The Enfield Poltergeist Tapes. This is from Maurice Gross's tapes. Maurice Gross was the researcher. Now, I met Maurice. Another story. Now, look, as far as I was concerned, I was a perfectly ordinary GP, and then someone picked me up by the scruff of the neck and said, oi, look at this. And I'd be catapulted in this weird world. I mean, I'd obviously heard about the Enfield Poltergeist, but I was in the gym one day, and there was a guy there who was a GP who worked with my wife. And he said, oh, Ian, I hear you're into all this weird stuff. I said, yeah. He said, my patient's Maurice Gross. Would you like to meet him? So I said, yeah, can you arrange it? He said, well, I'll have a chat with him. And if he wants to speak to you, I'll give you his number. So he phoned me up and said, yeah, Maurice will speak to you. So I phoned up Maurice Gross, and he said, as you're a GP in Enfield, you're interested in it, why don't you come round to my house? We'll have a chat, and I'll play you the tapes. So I did. So, all of a sudden I was in this weird world. I was meeting like Maurice Gross, for God's sake. What was all this about? So he was a lovely guy, very tiny man, short. He took me into his house. I met his wife, Betty. She was doing some baking. I had chocolate biscuits, and we sat in his front room. And he told me the story of how he became a psychic investigator. And unfortunately, it was from the death of his daughter, Janet. Janet had just finished her degree at Cardiff, and she was coming back on a motorcycle and was killed in a motorcycle accident. And Morris got what he thought was a sign from her. He saw a rainbow at a particular moment with a rainstorm that, when he told it to me, it didn't mean a lot to me, but it obviously had a profound effect on Morris, as these things do, because often they're very personal. And it made him think that she was trying to contact him. So he researched it and realized that the Society for Psychical Research was worth going to. And he went there. And it so happens that, of course, at the moment he joined, then someone had reported, I think from the Daily Mirror, that there was a problem going on, and that the SPR had been alerted to what was going on in Enfield. So he joined. He went there and witnessed all the phenomena. So anyway, I spoke to Morris, and we had a lovely conversation. He played me the tapes, and Morris hadn't just witnessed the Enfield Poltergeist. He was head of the Spontaneous Phenomena Committee, I think it's called.
Yeah, the people that burn. Is that right?
Spontaneous
No. Spontaneous phenomena is spontaneous psychic. So they don't adhere to one hypothesis, which is the spirit hypothesis. It could be psychokinesis. So it's spontaneous phenomena. And he said, look, whatever's going on is definitely real. He's seen it. He said, I've seen enough poltergeists in my time. It's not just the Enfield. I've investigated loads of them. And I said, well, what do you think is going on? He said, I think the best way of thinking about it is like this. He said, this wasn't told to him. This was told to him by a Romany lady he knew. He was speaking to about it. And he basically said, think of the energy of these adolescent girls, often, or boys, disturbed adolescents. They've got a lot of energy. And this energy sort of is like, can be used for all sorts of things. It's like a psychic energy, psychological energy. And it's like an energy football. And then maybe some discarnate entities come along, they start kicking around and they start using it. And that's what it is. So it's a bit of them doing it, the kids, but also a bit of the others. In fact, what you're talking about is actually spontaneous physical mediumship, which is what I think you'd now call it. In other words, there's enough energy. The energies are they're open to it. They're undeveloped physical mediums because there's a lot of energy. So some of the stuff they could do, some of the stuff they do by trickery because, they're kids and why not? And then, of course, there's a long history of mediums doing trickery. We'll talk about that in a minute. A lot of the very most famous mediums actually were caught out. I mean, not even Colin Fry. Gary Mannion recently, famous one. Eusapia Palladino, who was a very famous.
How did Gary Mannion get caught out?
Infrared cameras.
Infrared camera.
What did he say?
Well, I don't know. I think he's still doing his stuff.
I saw it actually. I saw the videos, and then I saw a posting online from him. Basically, it was at this place in Kent. I've been to maybe once or twice. The in Ashridge in Kent.
Yes,
the tree, the something tree. It's called
Banyan
tree. Banyan tree. It's like a spiritual centre where they do demonstrations of mediumship and stuff like that. Now, I didn't see Gary Mannion myself at this thing, but I know of the people. I don't know them, but I know the people that run it. And I believe they had some suspicions about this Gary Mannion. He supposedly does psychic surgery. Again, I've never seen him do that, but I was invited to go and see him one time, and I just never got round to it. I said, no, I'll go to my GP instead.
I'll do it.
So basically, the next I heard about this psychic surgeon, Gary Mannion, was when he was exposed, and they'd mounted like infrared cameras in this seance room, and there was all these people sitting around in a circle. That he was in his little trance cabinet, and he crept out the trance cabinet. You can actually see this. Oh my god! It's the gall to do it. He's going round and he's touching people on the back of their heads, and he's quietly taking off his shirt and then running it over their heads so they can feel some clothes, things like that. It's all in complete darkness, of course. And he's doing that the whole time for the whole duration of maybe an hour or something, doing these various things. And then they basically said, look, here we go. You've been exposed. And they played him the tape. So he went back online through his YouTube channel and said, I was directed to do this by the
By
spirit.
spirit.
Yeah.
Isn't that what Colin Fry said as well with the trumpet incident?
I know he was caught. I don't know the details.
Yeah, it's a good excuse. I mean, who knows? I mean, have you? There's a book called The Trickster and the Paranormal. I can't remember the guy who wrote it. It's a classic. And it looks at he calls it these liminal areas, these borderland areas. And he said this is where the trickster inhabits. And so whenever you get this sort of UFOs, Bigfoot, mediumship, you always get this trickster phenomena coming in, and it manifests itself in different ways. It appears to play tricks on you. The person doing it appears to be a bit of a trickster. Classic one being Uri Geller. Is he real? Isn't he? People swear that that stuff happens. I mean, Howard Hughes, who we were talking about before, he's a friend of his. He said he's seen stuff happen that couldn't possibly not be paranormal, and yet at the same time there's this element of tricksterism. So it seems to be that this area invites those sort of personalities.
How was Gary Mannion as a platform medium? I mean, have you ever seen him? Was he any good or?
Never seen him myself.
He gave me healing, actually.
He did. And did it make a difference?
I'll tell you a story. Trish Robertson.
Oh yeah.
Yep. She who I know quite well. She contacted me. She did a book about healing, and she looked at Gary Mannion's healing cases and was reasonably impressed. The weird thing is, I'd just been diagnosed with arthritis in my ankle. I was really miserable. I mean, really, really, really miserable. And she'd sent me this book. I said, "Oh, maybe I ought to have some healing because I've just been given this diagnosis." So I thought, well, hang on a minute. This is spirit. Let's follow it up. So I tracked Gary down, and bugger me, he lives in South Benfleet, in the road. Wait for it, parallel to my sister-in-law's road. So it's like her house. If you go straight out her door and go through the other house, and then through another house, he'd be there. Yeah. I thought I've got to go and see him. So I went round to his house, and he was very nice. Charged me 20 quid. I mean, I'm in for anything. I'll give it a go. I lay down. He put his hands on my ankles. You could see his house was obviously the city. He had like black bin bags round to sort of block out the light. He said, "Yeah, that's for my circle." Very nice. Did it help? And I've still got arthritis. I mean, that's the thing with healing. I mean, but for me, it wasn't the fact that it was healing. It was the sheer coincidence was delightful. And whenever that happens, maybe I am crazy, but that makes me think. That there's a sign. There's a little journey there that I've got to explore this, and that actually cheered me up. Actually, so Gary Mannion cheered me up, but I can't attest to his mediumship or anything because I haven't seen him there. But that's me and Gary Mannion. He probably won't even remember me, to be honest.
I believe he lives in Australia now. I think he moved there.
Oh, okay,
yeah. So whether that's deliberate after his thing, I don't know. But I do recollect that he flies back and does these things, or did. Although he's still doing that. But
I can't think why I'd leave South Benfleet for Australia. It mystifies me.
Yeah.
Who would book him? Who would actually book him after that?
I know.
That's the trouble, isn't it? Yeah. But Colin Fry though recovered from his he was reading a trumpet around, wasn't he? Colin Fry.
He gave me a really good reading as well.
Yeah.
This is a weird one with Colin Fry. I saw him at, I think it was St Albans Spiritualist Church, coming up to about 9 years ago now. And I was sitting at the back of the church, and he'd already done part one of his demonstration, which was really good. Then they had a break, and it was all part two. And he began, and he said, "Now I'm looking for someone here. I've got a grandmother who's saying about someone that plays guitar, or they haven't played it for a while, but they should pick it up again. She doesn't like the music, but she says you're very talented at it." And he's going around, who used to play the guitar? And he's pointing, who used to play the guitar and might be considering starting it up again. And this lady put up her hand, and she'd already had a reading in part one. And he goes, no, it's not you. I've already come to you. And he looked at me, and I had a lot longer hair then, so whether that was a thing. But he said, "Sir, is it you?" And I went, yeah. And I play bass guitar in bands and things. And I was actually thinking of getting together with my brother, who's a guitarist, to form a band, which we did go on and do. And so he gave me that reading. And I can't remember the details of it, but it was quite good, I thought. And then at the end, I thought, well, it's the end of the thing. He's selling his books. Oh, I'll go and buy a book of his and get him to sign it. So we all got in the queue, and I was the very last person to sort of get my book signed. So I said, oh, thanks for the reading you gave me there. And he goes, he says, did you used to work in a children's home? I went, no. And he goes, he says that when I came and gave you a reading, he said, I could have sworn that you was the guy I used to know that worked in a children's home as like a child psychologist. And I said, no, I've nothing to do with that at all. He goes, oh, crikey. He said, you look the spitting image of this guy I used to know. So anyway, he says, right, who do you want the book signed to? I said, can you sign it to Neil, please? He goes, oh, my God, he says, that was the name of the bloke I've just been telling you about. So, the weird stuff again.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. I've got to tell you a story. I went to a psychic fair in Southgate once, just because I was getting into all this, and I was, I wasn't sure what I was doing. I was just investigating. So I was in this psychic fair in Southgate, and I went up to this woman. She was doing crystal readings. She's charging 20 quid. I wasn't going to pay 20 quid for a crystal reading, but we got talking, and I said, and she said, "What's your name?" I said, "I'm Ian Rubenstein. I'm a doctor, and I'm interested in this." And she said, "Oh my God!" And she showed me her pamphlet. She had like a list of. She had my name on it. She said, "I've written your name down because I want to get your book." And I just, where did that come from? It was just weird coincidence. Just stuff like that. And when they happen, you think there is definitely something going on. And now, my son, who's the mathematician, the one who's just got his PhD, says, "No, Dad, it's just chance." And
there's quite a divide within the kind of the scientific community and the spiritual community, as you're blatantly aware. But interestingly, I mean, I actually run psychic fairs myself, more commercial based within kind of pub settings and things like that. So we get not so much spiritual people, but we get kind of all walks of life coming in, including doctors and nurses. And they do come from the medical profession. They do have readings with us, and they do believe it. And sometimes I have chats with them, and I say, you've obviously come. I won't ask your background medically, but obviously you do work in that area. And how do you kind of like balance between the spiritual side and the medically trained side? And they just said they just compartmentalize it. That's our learning, that's how we've done it, that's the medical stuff, but also I've had weird stuff happen as well, and that's in a different compartment kind of thing. That's kind of how they've explained it to me. And I don't know if you've ever seen shows called Haunted Hospitals on Sky or anything like that.
No, I haven't seen no.
Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating.
Well, I mean, every you work in a hospital, the nurses, because they're with people, they always got stories to tell you. Because they're hanging around the place.
It is rife. I would say almost every hospital, especially the old one, would have some kind of story going on.
I write about that in my book, actually.
About the doctors rushing to a resus, and they saw this person lying on.
That's right.
Remember. It's a good one. It's a really good
story, and then we'll go for a break. So what it was, I was at someone's 50th birthday party in the summer. Was all camping around the campfire, and this lady whose birthday it was says, "Come on, Neil, tell us some of your stories." So I said, "Oh, okay then." So I told a few spooky stories. And this girl, who I didn't know, but she was a friend of the lady I was with, said, "Oh, I'm a nurse, but I don't normally tell people about this. But as you've just said it, I'll talk about it." And she said that she works at this hospital somewhere on the south coast. I'm assuming it's Southampton Hospital, but I could be wrong. But it doesn't really matter which hospital it is. And she said that I wouldn't have believed it, but she goes, "I do believe it because I know the doctors that it happened to, and I know they wouldn't give me any bullshit," sort of thing. And she said that basically you got all the really sick patients that are on life support machines on one floor, close to death, etc., all on monitors and alarms and everything. And on the floor above, you've got the doctors and their medical assistants, and they got pagers and things. And then when they're paged, someone's crashed or something on the floor below, and they've got to go down the stairs, and try and resuscitate him in some way. So instead of taking the lift, they're running down the stairs. This doctor and his 2 medical assistants are rushing down the stairs, and they come past this patient who's in a gown, sitting on the stairs, crouched over, in pain, going, "Oh, my stomach hurts, my stomach hurts." And they said, what are you doing here? And all this girl kept saying was, "My stomach hurts." And they said, "Well, you shouldn't be here. You should be in bed. Look, we've got to go and help someone. We'll send someone back to you to help you, okay? So stay there and we'll send someone back for you." So they carry on rushing into this ward where they got to resuscitate this patient. There is the patient that got resuscitated, and it's exactly the same girl they saw on the stairs a few seconds earlier, and she was dead on the gurney thing.
Mm-hmm.
And of course they went back there and she wasn't there. So
good story. I like that one. That's a really good story.
I told my mum that. And she says, "But why would that girl or the soul of her be in pain?" And I said, "Well, my theory is that because she was stuck on the stairs, which acts like a medium's cabinet, which holds energy, and it's a square box-like structure. I've got this theory about this sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And she's still in phase to a certain extent with the earth plane, our reality. She doesn't know she's dead. And I think her cord, which you described in your near-death experience, has snapped, and she's feeling the pain of that psychologically, a bit like the psychological cough, if you like.
Yeah.
And she's feeling it, and that's why she's holding her stomach.
Yeah.
And that's why she can be seen and heard by the doctors. And then after a while, she's taken away somewhere, spirit guides or friends take her to the next dimension. And then all is good, we hope. So yeah, that's what happened. So
that's a good story. I like that.
Yeah.
Ian, have you ever been to Hertford Hospital?
No.
Okay, so Hertford is up the road, obviously up the A10, more near my way.
Yeah.
And I used to know a friend in Army Cadets whose mum was a nurse that used to work at Hertford Hospital. It's quite an old hospital, probably goes back to the 1800s, maybe 1700s. And the nurses and doctors there used to have a little dare. So it wasn't really, there's no A&E there. It's just like I don't know what the terms is, like a hospital that's not A&E. It's just normal conditions that they look after. But that. And they used to dare each other when one particular ward was empty, there's no patients there, but the beds were there. They would have a little nap sometimes in between shifts, just to kind of recuperate energy. And there was one bed they used to dare each other to lie on because they called it the haunted bed. And so previous to this, they'd have things like taps turning themselves on and doors opening and that kind of thing. And the dare was to have a nap there and survive. When I say survive, as in not run away screaming kind of thing. So my friend's mum was very kind of like, yeah, whatever. It's probably just a load of people mucking around. So she lies down, has a bit of a nap, puts some of the lights out, and then she feels her body being pushed. She turns round, expecting one of her kind of colleagues to go, "Ha ha, very funny." Nobody there. So she did get a little bit freaked out, and I don't think she slept in that particular bed ever again. But it's rife, and the more you kind of like speak to people, especially kind of in older hospitals, the more you hear these kind of things.
Can I tell you before the break? Can I just tell you this?
Yeah,
go for it. So when I was a houseman, how old was I? I was 22 when I qualified, so I was 23. In those days, you used to do 120 hours a week, and the nurses would bleep you. You had these bleeps, and you were dead on your feet. So there's a bit of a battle between the junior doctors because the nurses did shifts and we didn't. We did literally 120 hours a week. You would work 9 till 5, and then you'd be on call every other night. And you could do a shift going to work at 9 o'clock on Friday morning, and you get off shift 5 o'clock on Monday, and you would work continuously. And then you'd work your normal week. It was just crazy. So, and of course, the nurses would have to call you for things. So there's always this, you didn't want to be called. You just wanted to, there was no trouble sleeping. You just were out cold. So one night I got called, a patient had died, and I got called to certify the death. And I was really, really pissed off. I was exhausted. So I thought, I'm going to get my own back. So the curtains were drawn. I go in there. I started going, nurse, quick, this patient's not dead. She goes, It was so cruel. It was so cruel. I was very young. Got my own back. Anyway, yeah,
right.
Do that. Now you get thrown out for doing that. But
I bet.
Yeah.
On that note, then we'll take a break here on the Paranormal Peep Show, and we'll be back in a moment.
Glenatye Publishing is proud to announce the release of our latest novel, The Demdike Legacy by Barry Durham. Set in a quiet village in Lancashire, England, an enigmatic murder reignites a legacy of witchcraft thought to have died out 400 years before, when the Pendle witches were hanged at Lancaster Castle in 1612. As the death toll rises, the descendants of the original Pendle witches are forced out of hiding and assist the police in tracking down the killer before they are all wiped out. The Demdike Legacy is a thrilling mystery novel that blends modern detective work with old-world pagan practices. The Demdike Legacy is now available in both softcover and ebook formats on Amazon.com and at Glanatai.com.
Imagine no longer being tied down to your computer, but having the freedom to take live talk radio with you anywhere you go. TalkStream Live introduces our first ever iPhone application. The talk shows you follow now follow you, and your iPhone is now the fastest and easiest way to stay connected to the best talk radio on the internet. Listen to live talk shows 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. TalkStream Live, now available in the iTunes App Store.
Welcome back to part 2, where we're talking to Dr. Ian Rubenstein about his psychic experiences as a GP and as a medium, but also his knowledge of the Enfield Poltergeist, where he actually bases his practice. So we were just chatting in the break there a little bit about good and evil and simultaneous time. So we thought we might as well just carry on that topic so that you guys out there can take a listen. So Andy, you was asking Ian, what do we think of good and evil, or what is good and evil? Is that right?
Yeah. So we promise you viewers we will go back to the Enfield Poltergeist. But yeah, I mean, in a way, it does kind of like connect in terms of like angels or demons or good spirits or bad spirits. But what we were talking about is the idea of good and evil. And I was wondering, and we were going into the realms of like what God is and synchronicity, and how maybe synchronistic things are inspired or created by a God energy, not an old man on a throne, but kind of like the energy of the universe. One of the things I'm trying to get around in my head is, if we as souls are connected to God, and God is about love and about positivity and about creation, how do we then explain the Inquisition and the communists and the Nazis and all the scum basically of the universe? So Ian, over to you. How do you kind of like,
anybody who gets into this field, you've got to wonder about the good and evil, because there's no doubt about it. There is evil. I mean, there's horrible evil in the world and everything. And it's the question is it a force like the devil, or is there a good force like God? The way I see it, because I don't come from a religious background, is we were talking about that. I believe time and space is an illusion. And if time and space is an illusion, there's no such thing as time or space. And it means that creation is now. We're all co-creating. And if we are part of the universe, we're part of the creative energy of the universe. And we're doing that now. And that might explain coincidences, strange coincidences that link across time, because there's no such thing as time or space. Maybe the universe is like a huge art installation, or maybe the universe likes to play. And maybe it likes to do things, and maybe even though there's no time, the universe is developing, and maybe we're building the universe. Now let's look at the idea of inertia. It's hard to do things. It's hard to push a stone uphill. The minute you do anything, you get some resistance, and this is where I think the nature of good and evil comes from. So if we think that there's a defined place or state of the universe that it wants to go to, maybe the universe is an organism that's developing, and maybe it wants to go to a certain place. We could call that good, ultimately. We don't know what it is. We can say that is what the universe wants to be, or is heading towards. Anything that would thwart that, you would say, well, that's the opposition. That's bad. So let's take this idea. You're in a car. The car's stationary. You open the window. You put your hand out the window. What do you feel? Nothing. You go forwards. What do you feel? You feel your hand being pushed backwards. You might say that's the opposition. That's bad. But actually, it's just the opposition from your own forward motion. That's because the air doesn't want to move. You go in the opposite direction, you get your arm being pushed back in the opposite direction. So I think the universe has got inertia, and I think that what we call bad is when we actually try and make a change and we get resistance. Now, I'm not saying it's a blind force, because I actually think that the universe, when we get the resistance, somehow it can be personified. And you could argue that there may be part of the universe doesn't want, maybe it has got wants, maybe it is an organism, doesn't want to change, doesn't want to develop, and it will resist you. and that opposition you'd experience as bad in your life. And maybe it's manifested through the Nazis and all horrible stuff like that. And equally, it may be that the bit of the universe that wants to go forward, you might call it the angels, will help you. So when you think about forces and personification of a universe that wants to develop and doesn't want to develop, the resistance, I think that might explain some of it. Of course, I don't know. It's just my semi-scientific sounding way of saying, yeah, there is good and evil. But it makes sense to me because, if you don't do anything, you never experience anything. If you don't make a change, you won't experience any opposition. It's when you start to make a change or experience opposition, that's when you start to experience opposition. I mean, so one thing I've noticed in my life, that once you begin to develop in any sphere, you come up against some opposition. Mm-hmm. Now, if you're doing bad stuff, you'll get opposition from the good guys.
Yeah.
So it works both ways. So it's inertia. Once the universe is in a state, it doesn't want to change in either direction. Mm. So, and the dynamic tension is between which way does the universe want to develop? Is it in one direction, or does it not change? Does it want to go back to the place where it came from?
Are you a fan of the Matrix, Ian?
Sorry?
Are you a fan of the Matrix trilogy film?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's Gnostic, isn't it? It's the idea that we're in a sort of constructed reality with the demiurge, which is like the evil version, the lesser god. Yeah, I love all that, obviously.
Some of the conversations between Neo and the Oracle and the Architect and even Smith are absolutely fascinating, where the Oracle represents the spirituality, the Architect represents kind of like rational and reason and logic, and the Architect's job is to create balance in the universe, and the Oracle's job is to create imbalance. and the Neo Smith.
Have you ever read the Michael? I probably don't know. It's Michael Moorcock. You heard of Michael Moorcock?
No, not heard of him.
No, well, I used to love them. Michael Moorcock was he was a musician and science fiction writer. If you ever remember the band Hawkwind?
Yeah.
Yeah. I used to love Hawkwind when I was a teenager. They were my band. They were space rock, and he was associated with the band Hawkwind, and he wrote some really, really good, trashy pulp science fiction. And he had this idea, but really, really good. I used to love it. I don't think I'd read it now, but I really, really meant something to me when I was a teenager. And the idea is that you've got this balance between the forces of chaos and the forces of order, and that there's always this dynamic balance, and that the eternal hero, which always had the initials JC, Jesus Christ, or Jariak, or Jerry Cornelius, and he was always at the fulcrum of this balance, and the idea was to maintain the balance so the universe didn't get out of kilter. And that's something there, isn't there? We all feel that, I think.
It's only something that really made me kind of like, whoa. I don't know if you ever listened to Bashar, not Bashar al-Assad, but Bashar, channeled by Daryl Anka.
No, I haven't. No.
But he's kind of like this spiritual entity being that kind of like gives very interesting, quite funny talks on things. And one thing, very simple thing that he said was, really, in the bigger picture of things, there's only one person in the room. In other words, there's really just one soul. In other words, I'm talking to myself as I'm talking to you. You're talking to yourself as you're talking to me. We're experiencing it. Well, I'm experiencing it from this perspective.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, we're different points of view of a universal consciousness. Yeah, I mean, that is that makes sense to me. I mean, who knows? Go and prove it. But it certainly makes sense to me, because all this talk to anybody who's a hard-nosed scientist is like complete rubbish, isn't it? Really, and they don't want to know. Yeah. But when you've experienced weird stuff in your life,
you can't go back.
You can't go back.
I've had it myself, Ian. Once the door is open, you cannot.
Is it the blue pill? Which is the pill that you take to open your eyes? Is it the red pill?
It's the blue pill, yeah.
It's the blue pill. Well, we've taken the blue pill, and we can't go back. It's simple as that. We've gone down the rabbit hole.
Trouble is, I'm on a repeat prescription for him.
Now we're knee deep in rabbit droppings, and the rabbits are just dragging us down further. So, should we talk about the Enfield Poltergeist now?
Yeah.
So,
please do.
So of course, I've got no personal experience of the actual Poltergeist. It was long over by the time I entered Enfield, but. So I'm sitting in the Eagle House surgery common room one day, and we've got a temp secretary there, and she's reading the Enfield Advertiser, and she said, "What's this about the Enfield Poltergeist?" This is when the film The Conjuring and then the BBC films were being made. Yeah. She said, "I've never heard this. What's this Enfield Poltergeist?" So I told her the story, and she said, "Oh, anyway." At the time, I was doing ghost hunting. One of my patients, a guy called Mark, ran a ghost hunting group. And yeah, when you go ghost hunting, you tell the police station where you're staking out, and you wear T-shirts with the logo on it of the ghost club, so they know that these strange guys hanging around the church or whatever are actually who they are. So Mark was quite insistent we go get some T-shirts. Now, there's a place, a firm called Direct Boot and Shoe. You probably see their adverts all over North London. They do T-shirt printing. Actually, they weave T-shirts. They embroider logos.
Mm-hmm.
They've got this really neat sewing. It does coloured thread. It's computer graphics. So they put the logo in, and it weaves it in a machine. So I had to go and get these T-shirts. They were there was a design there, and I had to go up there and buy a couple of T-shirts. And Mark said it wouldn't take long. They take 10 minutes for them to make it. So it just so happens there was a visit in the home visit book. I just had a chat about the Enfield Poltergeist. Went downstairs, looked in the home visit book. Oh, there's a guy called Derek. He's just had an operation. He's recovering. He wants you to give him a signal and have a look at him. I thought I'll go around there because it's right by Direct Boot and Shoe. So I thought, well, I'll go up, park outside Direct Boot and Shoe, get my T-shirt, then pop in and see Derek and sort him out. So I go into the shop. But it took about an hour for them to do the T-shirts. So I knocked on Derek's door. I said, I'm sorry I'm late, Derek, but I was in Direct Boot and Shoe. He said, what are you getting? I said, I'm getting some T-shirts. So I do a bit of ghost hunting. And he said, oh, you should have a chat with my dad. He's into all that. So, yeah, after I spoke to Derek and given him his sick note and everything, his dad, Terry, had come over. Derek just had an operation. Terry and Derek's mum had come over from Spain. They lived in Spain. They come over to look after him. It was a lovely guy. And I said to Terry, I went down, I said, look, to give this prescription, get it from the chemist, Derek, you'll make him feel better. And Derek said, you're into ghost hunting. I said, how come? He said, I am the son of the Enfield Poltergeist. I thought, and I knew, hello, this is it. We're off on a jaunt now because, you know, that's a coincidence, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I said, I've just been talking about that. I said, what happened? He said, yeah, the spirit Bill Wilkins, who came through this. So the story goes is that he was watching Strange But True, the Michael Aspel, which is really very good. And I say that I rate that as the best documentary on it. Yeah. And he suddenly realised that in it they said that someone had said that he was a relative of the spirit of the man who died in the house. And he realised that it was the house that he grew up in, and that the spirit was called Bill. His dad was called Bill. So he contacted Michael Aspel, and it turned out that his dad, eventually he lost his sight and he died in the armchair there. And further, he said that Terry's mum had the same name as Mrs. Hodgson, first name. And he's convinced that the reason why his dad was there, because he realised that there was a Peggy there, and he thought it was his wife. Anyway, so then, so what happened? Yeah, I went back to the surgery and I left something for Terry to pick up for his son. So Terry came down. So then I took him upstairs and introduced him to the secretary. I said, by the way, you know that poltergeist? This is the son of the Enfield Poltergeist. It was a really nice coincidence, wasn't it? Now, eventually the film came out. The Conjuring 2 came out. Oh my God, that was just rubbish. I mean, I actually saw that at the Ghost Club. Alan Murdy presented it. We were wetting ourselves with laughter. I don't know if you've seen it, especially the bit where the false teeth bite someone. So they're in this cellar, a basement in a house in Enfield. Now, houses in London, in Enfield, 1930, do not have American basements, which are like that deep with water, which then fill up with water, and then false teeth go and then bite into your backside. It doesn't happen. And
the Slender Man. What the hell is the Slender Man got to do with in any way of the end?
Absolutely, an internet meme type thing. but the BBC one was a bit more interesting.
That was Timothy Spall, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was good. And but the problem with that is they portrayed Terry, who was a lovely guy, right? Derek's son, as a clapped out, knackered alcoholic in a council flat. I mean, they interviewed him on that. And that was really upsetting to the family. I mean, really, really upsetting. Actually, it's an insult.
Yeah.
And Derek's brother actually, took it up with the BBC. I don't know what happened with it, but I mean, obviously, it wasn't withdrawn or anything. But it was a really upsetting thing because it actually made Terry out to be someone. I mean, Terry was a lovely guy, happily married, came over to look after his son. What more could you want? And they portrayed him to be
telling fibs.
Well, exactly. Yeah. So that's so. In fact, I said to Derek, "Do you mind if I mention this?" Because on the interview, he said, because he's a Facebook friend of mine. He said, "No, Ian, tell them because the more people who know the truth, the better." Though Terry is convinced that was his dad, but of course there were, when you read the books, there were more entities than just Bill who came through. There were some female entities. So, I mean, and certainly some of the towards the end of it, the girls could actually make this noise. They could mimic the spirits coming through with their own voices because they knew what they sounded like. But it could well be, as I said, it was a form of spontaneous physical mediumship, actually, with a little bit of spontaneous psychokinesis, because the girls were just doing it themselves unconsciously themselves. I mean, the photographer who witnessed it at first, I think called Morris, I think his name was, he was interviewed recently, and he said, well, it absolutely happened, but I don't buy the spirit hypothesis. I can't believe that. So it's a lot to take on. It certainly caused a lot of things. The problem I have is, this idea that the girls, but they did a laryngogram of the girls, and they realised that the voice was coming from not their larynx, but but from the false vocal cords, which is just above the larynx.
Right.
Right. And in this book I'm reading, they said that explains where the voice came from, and it also explains how when they put tea in the girl's mouth, the voice came through. But I'm sorry, I don't. But if your mouth's closed and it's full of tea, I still don't see. You can make a growling noise. I don't see how you can form words like that coming out. That doesn't make sense.
I'll tell you what, let's try it right now. Let's try it right.
No, you'll make yourself. Exactly. And the other thing. Did
you get any of that?
Andy Serkis, who did Gollum.
Oh yeah.
Now, Andy Serkis, I think he was using his false vocal cords to that. And if you listen to him, he says he had to have special Gollum juice. He had to drink this because it made his throat really sore. And Maurice Grosse makes the point, actually, that if you do that for a couple of minutes, you will have a really, really sore throat and you won't be able to speak. It's exactly what Andy Serkis says. He said it really played havoc with his voice. And he had this special fruit juice that felt lubricated it. So I think there's a lot more going on than just that.
This photographer who says he doesn't think it's spiritual. What does he think it is?
Well, I think he thinks he said it was definitely happening. A lot of people think it was just psychokinesis. In other words, psychic powers without the spirit hypothesis. The spirits are difficult to deal with. I mean, when I started getting this weird stuff happen to me, the idea of dealing with spirits is very medieval to the modern mind, isn't it? I mean, you think about it. You're going back pre-enlightenment. Is it everything spirits? It's difficult. It's a big ask to ask someone who's grown up in the modern world that actually there might be discarnate entities, because once you start opening up that, then you've really got to consider a whole new way of thinking. I've embraced that now. I think I'm not saying it's real. I don't know, but I'm prepared to entertain it. It's a useful hypothesis, and it may be real.
Do you know who lives at the 284 Green Street now and what it's used for?
Well, I don't know. There was a thing going on YouTube. Did you put it up, Neil? Someone put it on YouTube recently. A guy just visited it, and he went to 284, and there's a window in this house.
This guy going around all the towns, and I said, this will interest you. It's your hometown.
And it's got Jesus. It says Jesus House now on it.
So
I don't know, but it's But I mean, what other links do I have with it? Well, I gave a talk about my experiences at the Society for Psychical Research, and I met Guy Playfair there. Actually, I was at a party. There's a woman called Rita Leake, and she's lovely. She's a member of the Society for Psychical Research, and she invites everyone back to her Chelsea house. She's got a lovely house in Chelsea, and she just has everyone over there. And I ended up speaking to Guy Playfair, and he was telling me about his experiences. And Guy actually subsequently wrote the blurb for my book. So that's how I met Guy. So I met Maurice and Guy. The last thing Maurice Gross said to me, I thanked him for, he gave me about an hour and a half, 2 hours of his time. And I remember standing outside his front door, shook his hand, and he grasped my hand. He said, Ian, he said, first of all, he said to you, Ian, I told him about Felicity's face. He said, Ian, you know what you are, don't you? I said, no. He said, you're an undeveloped medium. So I hadn't told him I was in the circle because I thought he wouldn't approve, you see. So I said, well, actually, Maurice, I have to say that I'm actually developing. And then the last thing he said as I shook his hand was, I have absolutely no doubt that there is life after death. And then a year later, of course, he died. So now he does know. He was a lovely guy, very, very nice. The Mark, the guy who ran this, my patient who ran the ghost club I told you about, knows PC Heaps, the woman WPC. Yeah. Who saw it. Now, I've never met her, but this is just hearsay, but he said that she refuses to talk about it.
Oh, wow.
It absolutely terrified her. She wants nothing to do with it. She's absolutely convinced it was real. And the other thing I know is that one of my patients' families was related to the lollipop lady there's a zebra crossing outside the house. Then there's a school on the other side. And the lollipop lady saw, I think, the woman, one of the girls levitating, and saw a cushion, a pillow on the roof.
Wow.
And now I never met her, but I met her relatives. And they said, oh, yeah. She said, yeah, she always went on about that. She absolutely believes it happened. And I had one of my, Helen was one of my secretaries, lived not next door, but very close. And she was a young girl when it was happening. She said, there are all sorts of noises coming from the house. She said, everybody knew the house was haunted. So it was well known for being the real deal.
How long did it last?
I think it started at the end of August 1977. And I think after about a year, it started to die down. And I think there were bits and pieces. I think after a couple of years, it had more or less stopped. I think that the phenomena followed Janet at school as well. And she spent some time in the Maudsley Hospital being psychiatrically evaluated. And they said there's nothing wrong with her. And things calmed down a bit when she came out. But I think some stuff still happened in the house even when she wasn't there.
Right.
Which is very interesting. So you talk about the focus, but how come she wasn't there? Some stuff happened. Certainly it followed her to school. And poltergeists can follow people. Before lockdown, I used to attend meetings at the Ghost Club very regularly. Have you heard of the Ghost Club?
I think I've heard you mention it. Yeah, I've never
so
been
the Ghost
there.
Club is the oldest paranormal research society in the world. It was founded by, I think, Charles Dickens and those. It was a Victorian gentleman's club for telling ghost stories. It was very popular in Victorian days. And over the years, it had some very famous people associated with it. And eventually, they'd go out on ghost hunts and everything and tell stories. And it's waxed and waned, but the traditions kept on going. And Alan Murdy now runs it. He's actually a barrister. He's a lovely guy. He writes in 14 Times, very good articles, 14 Times. He's very, very knowledgeable. And he invited me to give a talk about my experiences there. And they offered to pay me. I said, well, I'll tell you what, don't pay me. Make me a lifetime honorary member of the Ghost Club. so me and my wife, we go there. And it's really nice. Before lockdown, we'd go. But we haven't been since, obviously. And one of the guys there actually joined it because he had a poltergeist in his flat. Now, I'm not going to mention his name because he might not want me to say it. But this guy is in his early 70s, trained as a physicist, but then became a writer, quite an avant-garde writer. He gave me one of his books to read, did my head in. It's very literary. I mean, if it's more than 5 words in a sentence, I can't read it, But I said, I couldn't read your book, but anyway. But now he joined the Ghost Club because he was in his he lives in a flat in Bloomsbury, and when he moved into the flat, he realised that the neighbours were at loggerheads, and they were all accusing each other of making noises and banging on walls.
Mm.
And he kept out of it. Then he was lying on his bed one day, and he had a shirt on a hanger on the handle of his wardrobe, like you do before you put it in the wardrobe. He was lying down. He said, I saw the hanger lift up, come off the hanger, and then it was thrown to the floor. He said, the minute I saw that, two things happened. First of all, I realized all the physics I knew was wrong. And secondly, it hit him that what was going on was actually a poltergeist. And it suddenly made sense, because all these noises and bangs were going on. And he calls it George. But he doesn't want the Ghost Club to do an investigation there, because one of the neighbours is quite delicate and suffers from depression, and he doesn't want to upset them. And he's been told quite right that if you don't give it the energy, eventually it will die down. So he's hoping it will die down. He says he's got used to it now, but he said, interesting enough, he went to stay with his nephew in Cornwall once, and the phenomenon followed him there.
That's interesting.
So, and he's not a teenager. Now, you could argue that he's quite open to this, because, you know, he was a physicist who then gave up physics and started writing avant-garde literature. He's obviously not a closed-minded mind. He said there was, like, he was in his hotel room, you know, so he's in the room staying with his nephew, and there was this loud bang, like a gunshot. And that's exactly what would happen in his flat. So there you go, just another story. That's not the Enfield Poltergeist, though.
Yeah, it's got a connection. There's a question of what is it, and is it location based, or is it person based, or is it both?
Well, they say a ghost is a haunted place and the poltergeist is a haunted person.
Yeah.
So I suppose in the case of that guy, yeah, that figures.
There's a friend of mine actually, whose mum used to teach the girls, the Enfield Poltergeist girls, whatever primary school they went to. Now, she said apparently they were a little odd, but that's all she really divulged.
Well, I expect they're shaken by their experience. I mean, really, you've got to be. You can't come out really normal after that.
Well, the fact the family did have problems. I think the father had been in Claybury Hospital with mental problems. That was an old mental hospital, psychiatric hospital. There were Billy and Johnny, weren't there? I think one of the Billy was. I think Johnny had been sent to a home boarding school because he had difficulties. Not surprising if you've got a father who's not well. And I think Billy, the younger boy, had a very bad speech impediment. So there was obviously a lot of difficulties in the family, but you often find that psychic phenomena occur when there are difficulties. They happened in my own life. I mean, I was going through a difficult time with my mum and dad. I actually fell out with them at the time, and my sister. And that's what started the energy released from that, I think, was spent up in my family. And I think that's actually what precipitated my opening. It's called a Kundalini experience, isn't it? You know, the idea, you heard of that?
I've heard of Kundalini, but I didn't realise it was an experience trigger.
Well, Kundalini is often experienced with sexual awakening, but actually it's a Hindu concept. The idea is you've got this energy at the base of the spine, which is viewed as a coiled serpent. And the idea is that the energy travels up the spine, opening up your chakras, as it does, you know, these psychic centers, until it hits the top of your head and comes out and then links with the higher energy. And that's this awakening is called Kundalini. It's often as your chakras open, the chakras being psychic centers that have various sort of things linked with them, this being communications chakra, this being your third eye, this being the link to spirit, this being your love center, this being your intuition center, and a couple of others. And as they start to work, then you start to have psychic experience. So certainly when you're developing as a medium, you use this model. It may or may not be real, but it's a very useful model. The idea is that when you talk about opening up to spirit, literally what you're actually doing in your mind is opening up your chakras, which all sounds a bit, oh yes, it's my chakras. You know, oh yeah, my chakras.
Oh, misaligned.
I never thought that I'd be saying this. You know, 65-year-old doctor at the paint my professor saying, "Oh, it's me chakras." But there you are. It's a bugger. That's what life does to you, right? So that's so you use that. So the Kundalini experience can be quite devastating if it's not handled properly. As I said, it can be destabilizing. I mean, I had my own Kundalini experience. And I guess you could say that the family were dealing with this sort of rather disturbing energy.
Did you have poltergeist stuff as this was going on?
Pardon?
Did you have poltergeist activity as your Kundalini was being activated?
No. So in my case, I started to hear. So it started when a patient started to give me a message. So when I had all this problem in my family, I realized that my family had a problem going to my grandfather, the one I never met. He was my mother's grandfather, and he was a baker in the East End, and he was a bit of a gambler. He used to take the money out the till, put it on the horses. So that caused problems in the family. And I realized that the problems I had with my mum and dad, my cousins had similar problems. And because with my GP hat on, looking at how the dynamics of families, I realized we had a family problem. So, and because I was really upset after falling out with my family, basically my wife and I had been booted out of my cozy little family, my mum and dad and my sister. And basically I realized that this was a similar problem that my cousins had. I had quite a large family. And I interviewed my cousins, my uncles and aunts, and I traced it down to my maternal grandfather, who I'd never met. And I was thinking about that. And then one day, this patient came into my room at the end of the surgery. He was late. And he looked at me and said, "Sorry, Doc, I've got this man here. He's the grandfather you never met. And he wants to speak to you." And I thought he was mad. But as I'd been thinking about my grandfather and that Keith, my dear patient Keith, who's now my friend, Keith Bishop, had this message, I listened to it. And the message was, he told me everything that was going on in my family, and then said that you should be listening to spirit. I thought he was mad. I didn't even know what listening to spirit meant. And he said, "You're like a man on the edge of a cliff, Doc. Take a leap of faith on that cliff. Don't worry, they'll catch you." I said, "Who?" He said, "The spirits." I said, "You're mad." And after that happened, I started. One of the things that happened was I walked into my room one day, and as I left my room to go on a home visit, which was within walking distance, so I put my car keys on the desk because I walked to the patient. I felt a blow to the back of my neck and heard a voice saying, "Pick up your keys or they're going to get stolen," which I ignored. And when I came back, my keys had been stolen, and it caused me no end of trouble. Stuff like that, just weird stuff. But it was benign and it was helpful, because it would have been even more if I'd have listened. But I got there in the end, And ultimately, because I had a lot of support, a lot of help from my patients and my wife and my colleagues, I got through it, and it's developed, and it's become a thing, And so, I'm very grateful for that, and it has enriched my life. I may still be a bit unbalanced. I probably am a bit unbalanced, but put it like this: all the patients who hear voices come and see me. They say, "I know you know what it's like," right? So I've got a lot of them, and because when I as a GP trainee, I did psychiatry, and my first house job after I did when I was at North Mid was a psychiatry job. I remember saying to my senior registrar then, I said, "Look, we're sectioning these people, putting them under the Mental Health Act. They see stuff. I've seen stuff. I saw my friend's face change." And my senior registrar was a very wise man. He'd been a missionary in Africa. He was quite Christian. He said, "The difference is, Ian, is that what you saw enriched your life, but what these people see, this makes them uneasy. It dis-eases them, right? They are diseased."
Yeah.
And that's a very useful point. He didn't say, obviously we treat them with drugs, and in those days you zap their brains. I can tell you a story about that with ECT. It's quite a funny story, but of course, from his point of view, I think he may have probably believed that some of them were dealing with spirits because he's quite religious. And there's a group in the Royal College of Psychiatrists who do entertain the hypothesis that some may be schizophrenia or something. Maybe they are in touch with something. Who knows? It's difficult. It's a very interesting hypothesis. I don't really want to go into that. I mean, I have had patients who have come to me and say, "Well, look, you know it's the spirits, don't you, Doc?" And they have got schizophrenia. And I'm not going to take my medicine. So what I say to them, I think it's quite good actually, because it convinces them to take the medicine. So I say, look, I don't know. The psychiatrist obviously thinks you're ill. I mean, you're obviously upset by this. I don't know whether it's spirits or whether it's that. I don't have an opinion. Obviously I'm a doctor. I have to, treat you accordingly. And what I would say is, if you think it's spirits and therefore you don't take your medicine, let's say it is spirits, and let's say they're able to tune into you with your brain waves. Maybe the tablets the psychiatrists give you work. They believe it's for some reason. Maybe it's actually working by adjusting your brainwaves so they can't tune into you. And in other words, it's a different model, but the effects say. And actually, I've had a couple of patients say, "Oh yeah, that makes sense, doc. I'll take my tablets." Then they come back and say, "Oh, it's worked, doc." But of course, they can't tune in now. No, I don't. I mean, I don't believe that. I mean, I'm sure there is a physical hypothesis for schizophrenia, but you see what I'm saying? When you begin to think in different ways outside the box and begin to realize that other people have different ways, they have to think in a way that means something to them. You can then use that. So what I found is that having explored this area and seeing different viewpoints, I can then communicate better to my patients who also have different viewpoints. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I spoke to a psychiatric nurse once. Not I was being sectioned, but she was actually in a spiritualist group, and I said, "Oh, that's quite interesting. You're a psychiatric nurse and you're in a spiritualist group." And I said, "What would you say is the difference between a medium and somebody who's got schizophrenia or a psychiatric condition?" And she said something very, very true, and that's held this day. It's the information that counts. So if you've got a clock that's talking to you and telling you to set fire to the house, that's very different from somebody who's telling you that they're a nan and what they look like, what their name was, and when they were born, and kind of like how many sisters they had. It's whether the information checks out and whether the information is on a positive vibration connected to somebody that you should not know, but the person you're talking to would know and can identify and check out.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense to me. I mean, obviously, whatever is going on, if we have got a spiritual component, it's mediated through the brain. So you can understand that there'll be pathological conditions at all sorts of levels. Everything goes wrong. Just because it's the spirit world doesn't mean it doesn't go wrong. I mean, we were having this idea about the cosmic building site with someone's doing that, I'm sure things go wrong, but it gets corrected. The art installation has defects which become features, if you see what I mean. So everything goes wrong at every level. So I'm sure, obviously things will go wrong with your brain. And you interpret everything through your brain, so that makes sense. There might be a spiritual component of some other things. Who knows? The other thing is that when I joined my psychic development group, because I was very suspicious. I remember sitting in this spiritualist church. There was this guy, Joe, and he looked like Gollum. He had a shaved head. He covered in tattoos. I thought, bloody hell! And he said, "He's relaxed, Doc. We're not going to eat you." Anyway, he's a lovely guy. But what I was most impressed with, of course, is that spiritualist churches do attract disturbed people. People who have got mental health conditions, and far from pandering to them, they're very astute at recognizing the people who are not quite right and directing them away, so they don't, because it can be very destabilizing. This, and they're very, very, they've got a long history of recognizing, as Keith Hudson said, well, this field do attract them, Ian. It do attract them. We're used to dealing with them.
Right,
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, that's the thing I didn't realize. I thought they were all cranks and kooks, but they're not. Most spiritualists are very down to earth people.
Do you think that some of these people that do have this kind of condition, psychiatric condition, they're hearing voices, that it's just not a form of mediumship that's fully kind of materialized or developed within them, that because of their brain condition they might have had a sense of potential mediumship, because there's something wrong psychologically elsewhere with them, it just can't cut through the white noise as such?
If mediumship's real, but I mean, equally, who are we? I mean, if you look in yourself, if you do any sort of meditation, you realize that you've got multiple selves. I mean, there's Ian right now. He's having a lovely conversation. Then there's the rather depressed Ian who wakes up in the morning. there's Ian. I mean, there's all different sorts of people inside me. Well, we all have the different faces, aren't we? And you can imagine Noam Chomsky, I think, who's an intellectual philosopher. He calls it the society of mind, and the idea is that you have these different bits of your mind that all sort of compete with each other. And you can imagine that, maybe there's that, different networks within the brain all competing, bit of software running a bit, all trying, and then sometimes you can't integrate it. But then you can imagine, well, maybe a bit of software runs on a computer that maybe it's all running on the Matrix computer. I mean, there's a guy.
Maybe sometimes some software gets viruses.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, there's a guy called Robert. Hang on, I'm getting confusing. There's a guy called Don Hoffman, and he's working on a theory. He's a scientist that actually the universe derives from mind. So the physical world. So there's always been this debate that how can spirit interact with matter if they're two separate entities? And what he says is, well, actually, matter is like virtual reality existing in an information network, which is mind, right? And so he's got a mathematical description. And he says he reckons he's working on a theory that can postulate the universe is derived from interacting conscious entities. And he says that there is a universe, but what reality is actually like when you look at your computer screen, when you have icons for like the recycle bin, there isn't really a recycle bin in your computer. When you move a file into a recycle bin, it's something else is happening on the hardware. But what you're seeing is the interface. And what he's saying is that actually our brains and our bodies and everything around is the interface. So we don't know who we are.
The hologram as such.
Yeah, but we are not. It's not us. Even our brain, even our nervous system is an interface, and we're actually a lot more than that. So you can postulate all sorts of interesting things from that. But we just don't know. I mean, we know nothing, don't we? Really?
Yeah. Reminds me of the Seth.
The more you think you know, the more you realise you don't know.
Yeah. Well, Jane Roberts, when she contacted this entity, Seth, I say contact, he contacted her initially through the Ouija board back in 1963 with her husband, and she, before that, spontaneously went into a trance and wrote something down, like a 1,000-word essay or something called the universe as an idea construction. It was titled, and it's basically how the whole universe is just an idea in a mind somewhere or something, which was then later developed into the Seth material, which is very, very fascinating to read. I'd recommend it.
Yeah, I've dipped into and out of it over the years. The way I consider myself to be a Fortean, Charles Fort, 14 times. So his philosophy was that, which I think is truly scientific. He said, I think of any hypothesis, any hypothesis is I consider to be a mere set of clothes to wear for a time until they're discarded. and that's so in other words, keep your options open, bear everything in mind, and what works at the time you can use, and when it no longer works, then you have to go on to something else. So I think as a GP, I work within the medical model. It works. I prescribe medicines, and it makes sense, the physiological framework, the way the psychology works, it all makes perfect sense to me. It's a model. It's a useful model. It's probably right within its limits, whatever right means. But when it doesn't work, I'm quite happy to use the Chinese model, acupuncture. It also works. And then obviously I pick up messages and bugger me. That seems to work sometimes. It gives people comfort, especially with bereavement counselling. Keep your options open and don't be wedded to any particular hypothesis. Just be prepared to change your mind. Keep open. You've got to be flexible. If it works, use it. If it doesn't, discard it. Yeah, which is what Silver Birch said. You ever read the Silver Birch?
Oh, Maurice Barbanel's Spirit Guide.
Exactly. Yeah, he said, "Don't take my word for it. If it insults your intelligence, ignore it.
Yeah.
If it appeals to you, then work with it," which I think is a very useful,
very logical. Yeah. Have you had any conversations with spirit guides like in Circle? Has any people channeled them and you've asked them questions or anything?
Yeah, I've never been that impressed when people start talking in funny voices, I'm afraid. It just makes me. However, there's one guy called Craig, and he works at, funnily enough, on my journey, I ended up going. So I started at my mum's house with me on my arguments, ended up going to a circle at the top of the road where my mum and dad lived, literally on the corner, like 200 yards away. It's a healing sanctuary in Winchell Hill called the Sylvan Healing Sanctuary in Hoppers Road, Winchell Hill. I call them a bunch of the lost tribe of spiritualists. You know, you have these relict hominoids, you know, like shambling Neanderthals who walk around. Well, in the old days, I'm not liking them to that. They're a lovely bunch of people, but do you know how spiritualism started off in the with home circles, 1920s, home circles then it became formalized, the SNU got into it, politics is now churches, not so many home circles. This is a bunch of mediums, healers, who've had a home circle going since the 1960s.
Wow.
They've got nothing to do with the SNU, nothing to do with spiritualist politics, and they just meet and they meditate and they heal. And they have a discussion group every so often. So every so often I go for some healing. And there's a guy there called Craig. And Craig sometimes gives healing as Craig. And sometimes he channels a doctor. They call him the doctor. Now, as a doctor, if I meet someone who's a medic or a nurse, I just know. They just open their mouth and you know. Yeah? Just like a policeman would meet other people and they'd know. Yeah? You just know. Normally, when someone's channeling, I think, I don't buy this. Craig walks into the room. When he's the doctor, he's like a colleague. It's just that there is a doctor there. He's one of the few, the only one I've actually channeled where I've actually felt, this is real. This feels real to me. And actually, when he was giving me healing, he put his hand on my forehead and I could actually see purple swirling lights under my closed eyelids. So I tentatively buy that.
Did you ask him any medical questions that perhaps might be difficult for laymen?
I was just having healing. But if you want to hear a really good story, I think I told this to Philip the other day, Philip Kinsella, but it's a really good story. There was a medium called George Chaplin. He was an Aylesbury fireman in the 1960s, and he started channeling an entity who was called he claimed to be Dr. William Lang, actually called Mr. William Lang. He was a surgeon. You know, in this country, surgeons would be called Mr. or Mrs. or Miss. This guy claimed to be Mr. William Lang, who was a deceased ophthalmologist, eye surgeon from Moorfields Hospital. And he would do psychic surgery. But he wouldn't pretend to cut. So George Hunt would go into trance, and this quite well-spoken voice would come through, and he'd be holding his hands over the paper and he'd be clicking his fingers. I can't do it. He'd be snapping his fingers like he was asking assistants to give him tools, you know, this one, and he'd be speaking like there was something going on, like an operation. And he supposedly effected some very good cures. Well, William Lang's daughter heard about this and booked an appointment to see him, intending to unmask him. And when she saw him, she realized she was convinced it was her father.
Wow.
So far from unmasking him, she introduced George Chapman to his living colleagues who worked at Moorfields Eye Hospital. She had a circle at her house, which I believe ran for 30 years. 30 years. And every week, George Chapman would turn up, go into trance, and discuss with the surgeons, his previous colleagues, about advances that he was teaching them from the other side. So it said. One of them was a well-known ophthalmologist called Patrick Trevor Roper. And all medical students of my generation know that because Patrick Trevor Roper wrote the book Lecture Notes in Ophthalmology, which is what you use to study eye diseases. And when I heard that, because I was given the book to read about this by Roy Stemmen, who was associated with Psychic News. You may have come across Roy. He writes quite a lot.
The name's familiar, yeah.
Yeah, and he actually wanted me to review of his book. He had a book about this, but I didn't have time to do it. But I read the book, And what I found interesting is that these surgeons had met this guy. They were convinced that it was their colleague, and yet they didn't talk about it. If they'd have told the rest of the profession, look, this is coming through, maybe it would advance things, you know? Because it's obvious that there are doctors who've done this. And I know historically there are lots of doctors involved with this, but they hadn't really embraced it. So, so I suppose that I'm just one of a whole lot of doctors who've done this, but I haven't ever had any information from spirit guides, apart from my own spirit guide, of course, which I get all sorts of things told about, which is because I don't know if he's real or not. He calls himself Nestor. But I mean, see, when you're developing as a medium, the spirits say that you have to get friendly with your guides, otherwise it's not going to work. And I had a really big problem with spirit guides. Okay, I could just about cope with mediumship. Okay, I can cope with telepathy. I could buy that. And okay, and maybe we have got a discarnate part of us. Okay, if you believe that your brain's non-local, your mind's non-local, fine. Okay, spirit guides. That is just so much like, you know. No, it's not like the films, you know. Native American spirit guides. Yeah, it's a bit cringy, isn't it? Also, let's face it, hanging around you, are they watching what you're doing? Are they watching me when I'm in the toilet? You know? All this stuff. But actually, unfortunately, you reach a point where you have to deal with it when you're doing training. I mean, you have to deal with spirit guides because they start to make themselves known. Now, I still don't know if they're part of me. I have this internal debate, but what spiritualists say is you have to challenge it. They have to prove that they're real. And I think I can say that I've had quite a bit of evidence. So I can't tell you all the stories because some of them are quite frankly bonkers. I mean, I gave a talk at the High Wycombe Paranormal where I explained how my guys presented themselves by a series of weird coincidences. But one that I didn't tell, which was really, really weird. So I've got another guide called Koza. He says, I mean, could be the crazy man talking here. I felt this tall African guy standing behind me one day in my surgery, and he basically tried to prove that he was real, I think. And I've told this story before. Basically, I was thinking about him one day. He said he was from South Africa. And that I was with him on a ship in a previous life in the 1800s. And so at the time, my son had recorded Lara Croft and the Cradle of Life. This was like in the days when we had VCRs and videotapes. And he recorded this before I actually got into spiritualism. And it was sat on the VCR for about a year, unmoving. And everyone had gone to bed, and I was sitting up thinking about codes and all this crazy stuff was happening to me. I thought, I can't sleep. I think I'll watch this film. Because I quite like Angelina Jolie. So I watched Lara Croft and the Cradle of Life. I was watching it, and it's okay, but it was a kid's film. And after a while, I started thinking, this code's doing my head in. Then, as I'm thinking that, Angelina Jolie, as Lara Croft, picks up a phone, and on the phone she says, "Tell Koza to meet me north of the village. We're off to Kilimanjaro." I said, "What?" Pause. I'm definitely schizophrenic because schizophrenics get messages from TVs. Yeah. Rewind, play it back. It's definitely there. Well, that got my attention. The next half of the film was where her guide, Koza, was leading her off across the plains of Kilimanjaro, fighting off evil spirits. And I'm thinking, what? Next day I go to my circle and say to everyone, how does it happen? And they say, oh, the spirits can do that. And I'm saying, can't be. The spirits can do that. They're not gods. How does it work? Because as you said, because it's with coincidences, Paul had to record it. My son Paul had to record it. They had to audition Lara Croft, Angelina Jolie to play Lara Croft. It had to be there. I had to be. Oh, the coordination was impossible. How do they do that? They're not gods, your spirit guides, and that's where we talk about the role of coincidence. So that's one thing. The next time how it came through was, so my son had just qualified in medicine, and he actually did his first house job at Harlow Hospital. So he just finished. He trained at Cambridge and at the Royal London. He was about to do his first house job. Now, my son never talked about his girlfriends. At the time, he's packing up his clothes. And he said, "Oh, Dad, I've got a new girlfriend." I said, "Oh, really?" I said, "What's she like?" He said, "Oh, she's African." I said, "Oh, really? What country?" She said, "Oh, she's a medical student she's in the year below." He said, "She's from South Africa." Now, my guide came to be from South Africa because Xhosa is the name of the tribe. He said that's not his name. The Xhosa tribe are like Nelson Mandela, Archbishop Desmond Tutu. They're on the Eastern Cape. He said, I thought, hang on a minute, this is weird, because that morning I'd gone to the gym. I have a patient called Barbara who's a psychic, and she'd run up to me literally in that morning and said, "I've had your flipping African guy with me all night, Ian. He's been trying to reach you. He says you still don't believe him. He's going to bleed the world prove himself." I thought, when is he going to do that? So Josh is, that evening, Josh is saying, "Oh, I've got this girlfriend, and she's from South Africa." And I thought, hang on a minute. I said, "South African, yeah. Is she black South African?" He said, "Yeah." "Why'd you ask?" I said, "What tribe is she?" She said, "Hang on a minute, Dad. Why are you asking me this? Are you a closet racist? You know?" I said, he said, "How do I know what tribe she's from? She came here when she was 8, and her mum's a head teacher in Bromley." I said, "Josh, is she a Xhosa?" He said, "Dad, that's her surname." Anyway, she was gorgeous. I met her. I mean, she brought her home, and she read my book. And she said she read it on the way. She was flying to South Africa. And when she came back, she said, "Ian, I read your book." And when I read your book, I almost fell off my chair. Because when Xhosa shows himself in my head, he shows himself by showing me a bare foot and a bare ankle with a beaded anklet around his ankle. I didn't know what that meant. But she said, that is exactly what Xhosa warriors of that generation were given by their girlfriends, with the person they were going to marry. And that's something very precious to him. And he would, be proud to show that off to you.
Wow.
I mean, nothing happened. I mean, I thought, is she the one? But actually, no. I mean, they split up. But I think that was for me. I mean, now how does that work?
Yeah, I had a.
How does that work?
I had a very, I mean, we're coming up to the end of the show, but I'll just tell you this quickly. A very interesting experience with an African spirit guide as well. Ironically, back in the late 80s, I was in a psychic developing circle. And once a kind of term, they'd bring this lady, Margaret, in, who would channel her African spirit guide called Manico. And honestly, when she went into trance, she sounded like Fuzzy Bear of the Muppets. And I was trying, like you don't want to laugh. Where the hell can I put my face? Oh my God, here's Fuzzy Bear of the Muppets giving us wisdom from the spirit world.
And what you need to do with your life, you need to go in this direction.
I got some wisdom for you.
So anyway, I thought, it's fake, it's rubbish. And anyway, another term rolled by, and this lady was going to bring Manico here again. And during that time, I'd read the Jane Roberts book, Seth Speaks. And in there, Seth said that Christ did not die on the cross. He was actually switched. Someone else died and replaced him. I thought, that's a bit controversial. I wonder if this Manico would know anything about that, So I couldn't actually go to it. I wasn't feeling great. So I asked a friend of mine who was going to it. I said, look, could you ask this question? And I said, could you ask this Manico, did Jesus die on the cross? So she goes, yeah, okay, I'll do that. So she went there and she goes, oh, Manico, because he's just about to go back to the spirit world. Oh, Manico, before you go, can you tell me one thing? Now, she never mentioned my name. She just said, could you tell me, did Jesus die on the cross? And he paused and he says, give us a moment. And he came back after 10 minutes, like he had to go somewhere and try and find out.
Hang on, I'll just ask him.
Yeah.
Boy, Jesus, what happened?
And he came back and he said,
we do not know the answer.
And I said, that's definitely fake. Yeah, because Frank Oz, who did the voice of Fuzzy Bear.
Sounds more like Yoda.
He did both voices apparently,
Okay.
so that's why I sound like Yoda. So anyway, this Manico says we don't know the answer, and as soon as I heard it, I thought, oh, that's it, completely fake. Now, during this same time, I was experimenting myself with channeling spirit guides because I read this book on it. And I thought I had got this guide at the time who was like a writer, a Victorian writer called Henry. So every week I was trying to channel him and tune into him and stuff like that. Now, this was a week after this supposed Manico said we don't know the answer. I was expecting this Henry to come through, and I got my little instructions, practicing the meditations and stuff. Then suddenly, in my mind, I saw this visual of looking over the cross from above, looking down on the shoulders of a man who was on the cross, Jesus or someone. And I thought, what's going on here? Why am I seeing this? And then suddenly this voice came out of me, exactly like Fuzzy Bear, saying, it said,
You were the one that asked the question.
and I went, what? And then it said, and then it said,
I am Manico.
and it completely freaked me out that I came out of trance. So there was me completely thinking the whole thing was crooky and fake and everything. And this then suddenly happened to me.
This
What
thing.
was the answer? Did it
No,
go?
we still don't know. Jury's out.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I think he's real because I kind of he proved himself to me.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing.
The
It
answer
rocked.
revealed to you.
The answer about was Jesus swapped? Do you mean? Is that the answer? Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. I never got the answer to that whether Jesus died on the cross or not. But according to Seth, Jesus didn't die on the cross, and that's why he went to India and was later seen, and they thought he was resurrected. That's how the whole idea came about, supposedly.
But the thing is about this field always wrong foots you. Just when you think you've got it nailed, something happens. Just when you think it's not real, something happens, and this is the trickster element to it. There's something, and it happens at Skinwalker. You know the Skinwalker Ranch.
Oh yeah.
Again, trickster elements there. UFO stuff. It's always the trickster element to it.
Why do you think that is, Ian? Why do you think that is?
Well, this guy who wrote the Trickster and the Paranormal, I can't remember his name, but you can get it. You can download it on Kindle. He says that we're dealing with liminal borderlands, with things that are in transition. They said that when you deal with things in transition, this part of the universe comes into play. It's like the universe doesn't know what it wants to be. And it's like the shifting sand, like so 1 minute it's one thing, 1 minute it's wet, 1 minute it's dry. And this is the point where this trickster element plays up, because basically it's the psychological effect of being uncertain. You know, are we in this world? Are we in that world? Are we in between? We don't know. Psychologically, is it real? Is it a hoax? We don't know. But he didn't actually get any further than that. I know it sounds very nebulous, but if it's more sort of an artistic way of thinking, more of a symbolic way of thinking. If the universe got a logical side and it also has an artistic side, maybe it's the artistic side of the intelligence of the universe. I mean, I don't know. It's hard to express it, but it makes a sort of sense, but not the sort of sense, but not as we know it. Shall we say? It's different. It's differently sane. Not mad. It's just differently sane.
And on that note, I think we'll have to draw our insanity conclusions to a close. But thank you very much, Dr. Ian Rubenstein, for a wonderful, interesting 2 hours of discussion of the paranormal,
great fun, hasn't it?
poltergeists, and psychics, and everything all in between.
Yeah.
Any final words, Andy?
I was just going to ask a real quick one. Do you know, Ian, if the neighbours of 284 Green Street have got any psychic problems or paranormal problems?
I don't know. I don't know. I think it's all died down. You don't hear anything now. I mean, I'm sure if there was stuff going on, I'd hear about it.
They've probably got different neighbours now as well.
Yeah, but I mean, even, I don't think there's anything going on there now.
Cool. Yeah, fascinating interview, and we'll have to have you back on, Ian.
Yeah, more wonderful tales
if
of
you
the
can stand
paranormal.
it.
Yeah,
That's been a
we're
great
up
chat.
for that.
Next time we need to talk about UFOs.
Oh, we'll have a subject.
Yeah, definitely.
That's great.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for listening to us here, Andy, myself, and Neil, that's me, and Dr. Ian Rubenstein. So stay tuned for next time, and have a safe month.
Take care. Bye.